I'm here today with Larry Cooley, and we thought that we would get together and have a conversation here at the Brookings Institution about some of the dimensions of scaling education innovations for impact, specifically in low and middle income countries, but we're not going to limit ourselves to that. There's an awful lot to say about this topic, and we thought we would just chat with you all.
No, I'm just happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Let's start with a sort of introductory question. How do you define scaling in education?
Well, you think you started with an easy question, but you actually started with, I think, the hardest question of all. Figuring out what any person or any group or any entity means by scaling, in my opinion, is not a trivial question. It's a really important question. We're trying to scale not necessarily interventions, we're trying to scale outcomes. The interventions are a means to that. But the truth is you can't scale an outcome without scaling an intervention. You have to do something to produce the outcome. And at that point, it means also taking the interventions or something to scale. It could be a process, it could be a product, it could be a service, it could be a way of doing things. But whatever it is, at some point, there's a whole management task of trying to bring that to scale. The trick is, as you're doing that, to not lose sight of the outcomes that you care about.
Should scaling be the goal for every successful pilot or promising intervention?
So you get different answers from different people. I'll give you mine on this. I think if you're an NGO, if you're a philanthropy, if you're an individual, it needn't be. And for example, I'll use this metaphor. If I were interested in the food business, I might choose to open one restaurant. I don't have to aspire to have it be McDonald's. But I think if you're public policy, you've got to think for everybody. You don't have the luxury of being able to say, I'm going to come up with this beautiful little solution for somebody. So I think, yes, if you're a major international donor, if you're a government of a country, you have to at least have the hope or some reason to have a fantasy even that the thing you're doing could potentially scale to whatever you define the problem as being. Doesn't need to be everybody. If you decide it's for kids with special needs, then it should scale to the number of kids with special needs. If you decide it's people who are having trouble learning to read, then that's the population. But whatever it is, that's the denominator. And I think if you're in the public space, you don't have the luxury of being able to say we're cherry picking.
We often talk about scaling as a nonlinear iterative process and something that has to change in real time based on the information we receive, based on changing circumstances, external shocks to the system. But it's easier said than done. So how would you recommend that scaling teams go about their work of deciding whether or not it's time to change direction or even think about scaling down or pivoting to something else?
You can't pivot all the time on everything. And so having some standards by which you would judge when it's time to pivot and what means to pivot is important. If you're a researcher, you say, okay, you learn something, maybe we just drop it and go over to something else. But the opportunity cost of switching all the time is not insignificant either. And so lots of tiny pivots are not only inevitable, but desirable. Big pivots, there ought to be a fairly high threshold. The biggest pivots I know have come with either a political regime change or with one of these big external factors that suddenly materialized in a way different than you'd been expecting.
Is there a tendency when there's some significant external shock to the system for folks in scaling teams to say, gosh, this creates a new opportunity. I should let go of what I've been doing and seize the moment?
Well, I think they should think that, to tell you the truth. Scaling things tend to be more like policy change. They're windows of opportunity. So you're knocking on the door for 5 years, it won't budge. All of a sudden, something happens, the door is ajar. If you're ready, you kick in the door and you move. If you're not, by the time you get yourself organized, the door's closed again. So I found that the opportunities for scaling are like that. That something will happen, usually in the external environment, but not always. Something will happen. It will create the chance to really move forward with something that's going to make things better. And if you're ready to move, then that's your moment, and you move with alacrity. If you basically have to just start the research at that point, by the time you're ready, it's gone. So I think people who see an opportunity and jump on it are right.